for coming out for the OPT ins and outs of OPT and practical training. My hope today will be to cover a lot of information. So first thing, why are you here? What is OPT? OPT is optional practical training, which is employment authorization specifically, or permission to work off campus that is specific to individuals on an F1 student visa. It's a benefit. It's something that you are eligible for by nature of having your F1 student status, but you are not required to apply for OPT. So there's no requirement to apply as a benefit. It's just there for you. So I don't want anyone to feel like you have to do this. Most students do want to use OPT because it's your ability to have training and get some work experience with the major and the degree that you've earned at Oglethorpe. There are a couple of types of OPT. So there's a pre-completion, which would mean you're using your work authorization before you actually graduate from the university. There's also a post-completion, which means you've finished your degree and that work permission starts after you've earned your degree. And then some students will be eligible for a STEM extension or a period of an extension of that OPT specifically to earning a STEM discipline degree. So understand there are 3 specific types and they are very similar, but they do have different expectations and rules, as well as slightly different things that you do with the application process. I'm going to focus most of today on post-completion OPT because for the most part at Oglethorpe, that's what students need. We have a wonderful career development team and we have internships that are for credit available. So applying for OPT before you complete your degree is generally not necessary. You can use permission called curricular practical training to do that pre-graduation work. So how does OPT work? This slide really intended to sort of cover the timelines or the direction of how you apply for OPT. So you would request OPT with me or with Peter by filling out an online form. We then use that information to verify that you're eligible, meet the basic eligibility, and issue an I-20 that has an updated recommendation on the second page of your I-20. You then use that I-20 as well as other documents that are required to file an application called an I-765. This is the immigration form that is required to request OPT because OPT has to go through the US Immigration Services. So it's preparing a formal petition to the US government. The US government, the official, will review the materials that you send. And again, the eligibility piece, the review that Peter and I do at the beginning, the DSO review, really is the most important piece to making sure that USCIS approves OPT. Once the Immigration Service, USCIS, approves OPT, they issue a work permit called an EAD, or an Employment Authorization Document. So that's going to come in the mail as evidence that you have been authorized for OPT. As a part of being authorized for OPT, F1 students are required to report employment, report changes in address, various parts of, if you changed your title in your position, those are all things that are needed to be reported to the DSO at Oglethorpe so we can continue to maintain your record active in CVIS. And so I'll talk through all of these stages in detail. So who's eligible? I've reached out to each of you because you're eligible based on getting close to completing your degree requirements. And in most cases, I've heard back that you are on track to complete your degree requirements in the next semester or 2. So once you have been enrolled for a period of 1 academic year, which is a fall and spring semester, a student is eligible for OPT. Post-completion, again, comes at the time that you're nearing completion because the work permission itself will start after you've graduated. Students are eligible for a maximum period of 12 months of pre and post completion combined, and that is per educational level. So for right now, you're finishing up your bachelor's degree, you're eligible to apply for up to 12 months of OPT based on that degree level. If you go back to school later on in the US and you earn a master's degree or a master's and then a PhD, you would get a new degree level or a new 12-month period for each degree level that you've earned. If you go straight from a bachelor's degree to a PhD and get that 12 months of OPT, but then go backwards and apply for a master's program, you won't have OPT for a backwards degree completion. So just know, again, the idea is you would have OPT more than once in a lifetime, but there are some limitations to how you can apply related to forward progression, not backward. Students who are working on curricular practical training, that internship I talked about, there are some considerations because a student who earns CPT at the full-time capacity for a 12-month period invalidates the OPT benefit. So you've basically taken advantage of or availed the 12 months of work authorization and no longer have that ability for OPT. Part-time CPT has no impact on OPT benefits. Okay. I don't want to go into too much detail again about pre versus post, but what's critical to know is that post completion, it's not about the ceremony that you participate in, the graduation ceremony. That's an event that celebrates the graduation process, but it's about when your degree requirements themselves have been completed. So when did you actually finish all of the requirements that were needed to be conferred the degree? So understand that the ceremony, if a student finishes all their degree requirements in August at Oglethorpe, they may apply to graduate in May and walk in the graduation ceremony. But for purposes of OPT, your ability to have that benefit is based on when you complete your requirements in August, if you're applying for post-completion. When a student has a post-completion OPT, the expectation is that work is full-time, so 21 hours a week or greater. And there is no expectation that you wait to get a job. So this is actually the most important thing with OPT when you're thinking about post-completion. It's not about having a job. It's about when are you going to complete your degree requirements. That's the indicator of when you should begin preparing the application. So waiting to get a job and then applying for OPT is a recipe for disaster. You being here today and learning about OPT is the best way to make sure you've maximized the application cycle and the timelines of which you have not as much control as you would like. So thinking about your graduation is the first step. What is the date you're going to complete your degree requirements? Then utilize that information to decide when you're going to start preparing an OPT application. Once you do have the authorization to work, that OPT work permit has been issued, the expectation is that you will be working in the US. So there is a component here that you're applying for the benefit, but there's also an expectation that you actually do work while you have this benefit. So we'll talk a little bit about that as we get into the reporting. And again, stop me if you have any questions or want me to go back and rephrase anything. For students who are earning a science, technology, engineering, or math degree, and there's a list that the Department of Homeland Security puts out of those majors, you may be eligible after a period of your post-completion OPT to have an extension. So I'm just going to put that out there very broadly and emphasize that when you apply for a period of post-completion OPT, I'm going to determine at that time if you're going to be eligible for a STEM extension. If you don't hear from me that you're eligible, you should assume that you're not, because I want to make sure you have that information about the eligibility up front and can build that into your planning. Okay, so any student who is receiving the benefit of post-completion OPT must pursue employment that is directly related to your field of study. This is something that can be quite frustrating because I don't make the decision. When the university recommends the OPT authorization, we recommend it based on what we have about your major, and we indicate very broadly, you will pursue employment in your field. Ultimately, it is up to you as the F1 student to actually accept employment that is related to your field of study. This is really not as hard as it can sometimes be made out. If you're a business major and have a degree in marketing, for example, and you get hired to be a teacher of Spanish, those are not directly related. You did not earn a degree to teach, and being a native speaker doesn't, as the best example, doesn't give you the ability to use that work permission in that way. But if you're a marketing major and you get hired by a school to promote and do their social media and marketing, it's not about the employer itself, it's about the functions of the job. Are the functions of the job aligned with the degree that you earned at Oglethorpe? Again, there is an expectation that you're working, and within the law, the regulations for OPT, there is a maximum period of unemployment that the US government allows. So while you are on this authorization, this period of OPT, you can work in your field of study. And if you're not working, the maximum amount of time available is 90 days or 3 months of unemployment. This is a really frustrating reality, in particular in times when the United States economy or job market in your field is difficult. So it's super, super important that you continue to connect with our career development staff and be thinking broadly about ways to look at employment in your field. It's not something that you should do alone. And so I'm really grateful that we have such good partnerships with our career development and career services staff at Oglethorpe. They're the experts in this area. I'm also always happy to give insight and some suggestions on pursuing employment. And in a little bit, I'm going to put in the chat a resource that I hope you'll take advantage of. The work, again, being full-time means 21 hours or more. The great news is there's no limit on the number of hours. So if you find 3 jobs that allow you to directly apply the learning in your field, you can accept all 3 jobs and work 70 hours a week during your period of OPT, during that, using that benefit. There is no restriction on who you work for or how many hours, other than it being full-time as a cumulative. Your employment could be paid or unpaid. There are some examples of unpaid work after graduation. Maybe there's an internship and a period of time that there's like the 3-month internship, and that sometimes can turn into a paid job. Let's talk about all those scenarios, because what's most important is that you're not violating, or you're not allowing the employer to violate Department of Labor laws and exploit you as a unpaid employee. So again, the career services team are really great about advocating and making sure students are thinking about how to maximize benefits in employment. In the US, there are lots of different types of employment. I'm not going to go into great detail about all of them, but I want to acknowledge the fact that different field of study have tracks for different types of employers. So sometimes students find jobs that are considered regular employment, or a W-4, where you're going to be paid with a salary and have a tax statement at the end of the year where you've been employed as a direct employee of that company. A lot more, though, there are examples of independent contractors or 1099. Again, 1099 is the form that the employer gives you to report income. So you're actually not an employee of a company. You're independently working on a contract basis or a service basis. And there's also the ability to be a self-employed business owner. There's a lot of nuanced complications about being on a student visa and beyond as a business owner. So I do want to make sure we talk a little bit about that. We don't have great pathways right now in the United States for entrepreneurs, so I don't want to discourage you, but I do want you to be realistic about what that would look like long term. There are employment agencies that might be how you start work, where you do a temp work for hire through these agencies. Just know that employment through a third party is totally fine. You just need to be better at keeping records about the number of hours that you're working, because there may be some variability there. And then again, volunteers or unpaid interns may be a great way to make sure that you stop the unemployment clock while you're still pursuing long-term or more paid formal employment. Okay, so I put in the calendar invitation that I sent to you a couple of materials, and one of them is a timeline about when to prepare and how to be thinking about the timing of your OPT application. There's some windows involved, and so I think this visual is really helpful, and it's going to be on the next slide. But you're talking to me now because some of you will be completing your degree in May. Again, starting with your completion date, if you go 90 days prior to your completion date, that is the period of time that you can file an application with the U.S. Immigration Service, all the way up to 60 days after you complete your degree. So immigration only allows you that window of time to prepare and file the I-765 application. The application, once you've requested the I-20 from Oglethorpe, the Immigration Service has to receive it within 30 days. So if you're not sure what your plans are, it's not a great time to start the request for an I-20, because you want to make the decisions about when you're going to mail it to immigration first, okay? Understand what your timeline is for completion, know when you want to mail it, and then make sure you're asking for the I-20 recommendation at that point. If you request an I-20 from Peter or I with that OPT recommendation and then sit on it for 60 days and then mail it, it will be denied. So it's super important to think about the timeliness of when you actually mail the application. So again, this timeline that I attached goes into detail for each academic year, and where you're going to be thinking is the spring 21 timelines. And so we finish our semester on May 20th, 2021. And so you have really this 90-day window of starting February 19th for the US government to receive an OPT application if you're completing your studies in May, all the way up to July 19th, 2021. So those are the things to think about in terms of the window of time that the US government can receive the application. You should anticipate that the processing of the OPT application will take potentially 90 days or more. And that is a really unfortunate reality of where we are with our US government transition and what is going on with the US Immigration Service right now. I am very hopeful that that will change quickly as we get more stability in the US government. I've seen lots of variation in my career working with international students where OPT processing could take as little as 30 days and as much as 120 or 140 days. So I'm really going to remain hopeful that we'll stay within the 60 to 90 day range. But right now, the earlier you can prepare an application for OPT, the better, because you're maximizing that full 90-day window that you have to prepare and mail the application. So again, I will send this out afterward with some materials to everyone, but this is the link to the form. It's an online form. You fill out a couple of things there that allow Peter or I to review your eligibility. We would then issue an I-20 showing that recommendation for OPT. Because of COVID, you will actually pick that, no longer pick that document up. It will be sent to you electronically. It will have our signatures electronically. And then you can prepare the supplementary materials that go with the I-765, and we'll meet with you using Zoom, talk through the order of those materials, any questions that you may have. Most important thing, that the government receives that I-20 within the 30 days after the I-20 has been sent to you and signed by you and the DSO. The Immigration Service will receive the application and issue a paper receipt notice, as well as possibly a text message if you've signed up to receive text notifications. The receipt notice date is important because that is the official start date of when that 90-day or 60-day or 120-day processing is. And again, if I had a crystal ball, I would tell you exactly how long that was, but it is not possible. The Immigration Service processing time varies based on the time of year that you're filing or the number of applications they receive. And in general, they're receiving hundreds and hundreds of thousands of applications for a variety of things on a weekly basis. And so they do offer information on their website about the current processing time. But I think the best thing you can do is just anticipate maximizing that full 90 days by mailing your application to the government at the very earliest date possible. Once they've processed, once the Immigration Service has processed the OPT, you'll receive the EAD work permit. It will come to you in the mail. It is sent by the US Postal Service. And so understand that that's what you're waiting for. So when you're filling out your form I-765, there's a couple of things I would encourage you to think about. This is a form that is used for all types of work authorization requests to the US government. So it's not just for F1 students applying for OPT. Unfortunately, the form has gotten quite complicated. It used to be like a 2.5-page document that was pretty easy to fill out. It's now about 7 pages because they've gotten more complicated in all of the things that they're requesting. So it's going to be really important to read the materials that I will send out to you about preparing that application, responding to the questions, and making sure that you don't leave anything incomplete. When you fill out the address, which is generally on the 2nd page, I think, of the form, I really want you to be thinking about what is the address that you are confident you can receive mail. For many students, you've lived on campus and you might be in transition from living on campus to somewhere else. If that's the case, I highly recommend you use the Global Education address or the Oglethorpe University address care of Global Education. This will ensure that I can pick up the card for you. I will make sure it's scanned in and then the original document available for you to pick up at your convenience. If you move, it can create massive delays and complications that really will impact your ability to have the benefit that you should have without any issues. The US mailing has become an issue over time that has caused issues for students that aren't thinking through the transition from being a student to graduate of a university. So again, I'm going to make sure you have a packet that you can go through step by step as you're preparing your materials. But the evidence that you would send with your I-20 and with the I-765 form include a check or a money order for the filing fee, because everything with immigration costs money when you have to file a formal petition, as well as the photos that you would use to apply for a passport in the US. You have to have 2 new or recently taken photos, so don't use the one that you had at your visa appointment 3 years ago. Copies of your I-20, in particular, when you've had any authorization to work off campus. If you've never worked off campus with CPT authorization or OPT, then really having the OPT with the recommendation is all that is needed. You'll have to include a copy of your picture page of your passport, so your identity page of your passport, and your I-94 record, which you can locate online. And again, all of this is in the packet. The US government recently updated the mailing address where I-765 forms need to be sent. I'm a little bit anxious that they may update it again at some point. So I always want to encourage you, before you mail something to the US government, that you go directly to the website where you download the form and verify that the address has not changed. Again, I would love to say that they don't create problems for themselves, but they do when they make changes to addresses and don't send out widespread notification. Okay, so you've gone through, the decision-making about applying, you've gotten your materials together, you've sent them to the US government, and then it's a waiting game. One of the things that often comes in in terms of questions that we have with students are around travel, right? You finished your degree, you're thinking about starting work in the US, and why not go home and see family, or to even take a vacation to celebrate that you've completed your degree? All of that seems totally reasonable, and it would be if the immigration laws weren't making things a little bit complicated. When you're still a student at the university, so let's say in April, you have a long weekend and you want to travel to the Bahamas, pre-COVID, you might do that and be totally fine if your OPT application is pending. Once the actual card itself has been issued, you will need it in order to re-enter the United States. So traveling while the card is in process can be problematic the closer you get to that, say 90-day processing time. Additionally, once you're on a period of OPT, it's not just about having your valid visa, it's about having the work permit, your travel signature, and a valid visa in your passport that will allow you to request re-entry to the US. The signature on your I-20 form that you would normally need for travel also is no longer valid for a year. It's only valid for a 6-month period. So it may mean you have to be in more contact with Peter I if your job requires you to travel, for example, as a part of your job requirements. Once your OPT has expired, once that period of authorization of work has expired, you have a 60-day grace period that you can remain inside the United States, but any travel outside of the United States will end your F1 stay. So it's really important to, again, anytime you're on a period of OPT, you're still on an F1 student visa status. OPT is not a status, it's just a benefit. That means we really need to work together, Peter or I get involved in supporting you before you travel so that you're sure that you can return smoothly to the US. Okay, so the application for OPT, once the Immigration Service approves it and you have your work permit, really important that you send us a copy if it got mailed directly to you. I want to make sure we have a copy on file, so if anything comes up, you always have a place to return and ask for a copy. But it's also going to be really important you keep a folder, start keeping good electronic records or paper records, or both, of any offer letters or contracts, anything that you can establish about the job description itself and how it aligns with your degree, anything related to the number of hours or your job duties, tax forms. Keep all of those materials in a safe place. Again, whether you're going to use them to file your taxes or whether you're going to use them to later on involved in sponsorship on a work visa, or 5 years from now, something comes up and you need evidence. It's just good to keep everything together and well recorded. The other good reason to have this documentation is while you are authorized for a period of OPT, the federal government expects that you are going to report your employment to the DSO, to Peter or I, and that anytime your employer, so maybe you got a new job and you ended the old job, or maybe you added a new job, that all of this information is recorded in the US CVIS system. So it's going to be really important that you notify us. We have, again, that form that collects the information so that we can update it into CVIS. Understanding that we're helping the US government identify whether you've been employed or unemployed, and that ties into that 90-day period of unemployment that's available, as well as helping you prepare if there is an employer who's interested in sponsoring you on a work visa, your eligibility or your maintaining your student visa conditions and being able to transition to that work sponsorship afterward. So here's a list of the information, again, that the government expects you to report to us. It just is a little different than what you do now. What you do now is enroll in classes full-time. What you do now is check in with us at the beginning of the fall and the spring semester to make sure we have your updated address. It's just going to be a little bit more dependent on you, autonomously to check in with global education throughout your period of OPT. I don't want to get into too much information, but I get a lot of questions from students, rightfully, when we start talking about off-campus work, about the H-1B work visa. So at this point, the H-1B work visa has had a significant amount of tension in the news, and the previous administration was doing a lot to try to change and make more difficult sponsorship on an H-1B visa. I think that a lot will be changing relatively quickly in the next 1 to 3 years related to immigration sponsorship. So this information is what's current today. And so I want to stress that if you're interested in long-term sponsorship in the US, it's going to be important to find a good resource. I can connect you to some good websites that are very solid information so that you keep up with what's happening with this visa. The key thing is it's a sponsorship. OPT is not a sponsorship. You have unrestricted permission to work in your field of study with OPT. You can make job changes, you can work multiple jobs. It offers a lot of flexibility that an H-1B visa sponsorship does not. So understand that students often are very eager to be sponsored on an H-1B visa, and there's good reason for that. But it's also going to be important to utilize to the fullest amount your OPT work permission to test out different employers. I wouldn't jump right into a visa sponsorship right away unless you're confident that that's an employer you want to work with long term. H-1B visas are limited, so it's going to be really important to understand the cycle, the timeline for H-1Bs. And so April 1st, we're coming up on the period in which new H-1B petitions are filed for an October 2021 start date, so 6 months in advance. So it is important, like I said, to educate yourself if you're thinking about working in the US long term, about some of these timelines. I'm happy to talk with you individually and again, refer you to more specific resources. I'm not going to talk about CAP-GAP because that is very specific to H-1B, but I always want to emphasize that the information that I'm sharing with you is high level. There are other resources available to students that are directly the US government information. So the Study of States OPT Resources website is one of those. Immigration and Customs Enforcement has a practical training section on their website. And then USCIS has an overview of OPT as well on their website. So 3 different resources from the government agencies that are involved with the F1 student visa and the OPT benefit.